Hello, energy management business case students. We're back for our first full week. Now we're on online delivery now, of course, because of COVID-19. Pretty hectic week last week, but hopefully you folks were able to stay on track with your program so that we can hopefully head towards graduation the way we were all originally planning. Now, when we have our Zoom call this afternoon at 3 o'clock, be prepared to ask questions in that Zoom call, because otherwise we can use up to an hour, but if it only takes 5 minutes because nobody has questions, then that's what it is, okay? But those Zoom chats are your time to ask questions about your term paper, ask your business case or your mock business case, ask questions about anything related to the program. To the extent that there are no questions, then there's no need to waste our time. But you have up to a full hour to ask questions and so on about estimates or any other issues you have with your business cases if you come prepared to those Zoom calls. I will be using these video lectures to talk about, literally our lectures and our slides and to the end of the term, okay? I will also likely run something like this to prepare you for your final exam and so forth. But one step at a time, let's get through this first full online week and keep moving on our business cases, and we'll go from there, okay? Now, for this week, we are dealing with funding energy management within the organization. And that's the topic that I'll be lecturing on now, all right? So let's follow along and try to get through this lecture here. Okay, barriers to financing. That's one of the major issues, of course, in sort of getting anything moving on our energy management initiatives within an organization. Clearly, you're taking a business management business case course because that's one of the major issues. Learning how to draft a sophisticated business case is obviously a key issue. And that's because, we know this already, that energy efficiency projects compete with other projects for limited financial resources. In that realm of competition, energy managers must be able to make good business cases and know how to inject these cases into the decision-making process of the organization. By that I mean being timely in the development of business cases, when managers are meeting to budget for the next year and so on, that your timing for developing your business case links up well with the way that the organization makes its financial business planning decisions overall, so that your energy management business case gets properly integrated into that process. But the research still indicates that energy management business cases relative to other types of business cases that can be done within an organization still are lagging behind in terms of acceptance and moving forward with the business cases. Okay, this can be, obviously, is going to be a very serious challenge to energy managers, particularly when we go into a period of rapid change on energy use. And of course, the major step to overcoming that is simply awareness raising, okay? Building trust and confidence within the organization is a key aspect of getting a business case developed in the first place, and certainly read with a favorable eye in the second case, all right? And in a lot of organizations, because they have no experience with that energy management business case aspect, you might have to do a phased approach, as we've talked about in the course so far. You might have to lead with some relatively simple initiatives to build confidence within the organization as you move forward. And weak business cases continue to be a significant problem within energy management field. They often fall short because they are led by energy managers who don't, frankly, have the financial and economic training that one needs. And they tend to use a lot of energy speak, as we've discussed before as well. The business case must be built through a multidisciplinary team in many cases, because a lot of the times the energy manager won't have all the sophistication or all the skills on the finance and side of the organization to be able to be convincing. So you will often find yourself forming into teams to develop your energy management business case, as I've said before, and building consensus with key decision makers in the organization during the process of ramping up to do a business case, and then during the process of developing the business case is a very important matter. Okay, so talk to the operations manager, talk to the procurement manager, talk to various people, make sure that they understand what you're doing, make sure that they can comprehend your business case when it finally arrives on their desks, make sure that they're geared up to support it, make sure that they see something for them in it, make sure that they understand the incentives that they have within the business case. All right. Poor financial education and training of energy managers continues to be a major problem. Our program, for example, has one half course worth with basically the smallest course you can offer within the energy management program in terms of number of hours per week, 2 hours per week as opposed to 3 or 4. So there's a tendency to emphasize the energy aspect without realizing that a lot of what energy management is devising investments to maintain, to constantly upgrade, to seek continuous improvement in energy management. And that links energy management heavily to the finance and business management overall. That side of the company you have to engage with on a regular basis. And this requires that technical people in energy management at least understand the basics of financial decision making, the basics of doing cost benefit analysis, and these kinds of things, which is the objective we have for this course. You understand basically what goes into a business case. You understand basically what a cost benefit analysis looks like. But once you get into a more sophisticated environment, typically, as I say, you will be needing to upgrade your expertise on the finance and business management side as you go on in your career. You'll have to be sensitive to the fact that you need to develop project teams when you're developing sophisticated or more advanced efforts at energy management within an organization, especially within a large and complex organization. One of the other major issues, of course, is trust and verification. I mean, if you talk to, studies have been done talking to financing people, banks, and so on as to why energy management is not getting more attention in their loan portfolio. And they'll speak to those two issues, the lack of solid business cases, too much energy speak, and they'll speak to the problem of verification schemes, okay? They'll want to talk to you about how you're going to verify that this return on investment is going to take place, that we are going to see the energy savings, or that we are going to see the decline in GHG emissions, or whatever the objectives have been set out for the business case. How are we going to prove that? How am I going to know, all right, that the investments are making money for the organization? And why as a banker am I concerned about that? Is because if the organization doesn't see a return on that financial investment, their probability of being able to pay me back is lessened considerably. And as you know, banks, lending institutions are risk averse. They want to get their money back with interest if they loan you money. And one of the key things about that is verifying that you are getting the returns on investment by saving money on energy or other benefits that you've identified. How are you going to demonstrate that to decision makers within the organization and external lenders if those people are involved in your process? Okay, we know that there are measurement schemes out there that are getting enhanced credibility. The International Performance Measurement and Verification Standard is out there, but there are others. The US has one, the Australians have one, and so on. But they have a lot of similarities, and the point is that, you know, having a credible scheme applied to your business case for verifying your returns on investment is going to be a critical issue moving forward as we deal with more of these questions in a climate change context. Okay, so, you know, energy savings must be determined. They must be able to be demonstrated. Okay, and clearly that requires a baseline, right? You need to be able, as we've learned in our course, you need to be able to establish a baseline to be able to establish and verify that improvements against that baseline have been achieved by the investments or the process changes that have been taken, okay, based on your business case or any other plan that you might develop, okay? And another major problem in energy management is cost accounting, okay? Often energy investments will have longer payback periods than financial decision makers are accustomed to. Okay, so needing to educate financial decision makers on the issue of payback periods. And that is an important consideration when we talk about the fact that we should be using NPV and IRR rather than payback period to demonstrate the longer term benefits and longer term payback of these investments. All right. The other thing that we need to be sensitive to is that that energy costs are not going to stand still anymore. Climate change is going to be addressed. That is going to involve additional costs on traditional energy sources. And so all of those factors need to be demonstrated to the financial decision maker in context of the longer payback periods that can be seen in some energy investments. Okay, some pay back very quickly, but the larger ones tend to be longer term, obviously. The other major problem that we have in the accounting departments when we're trying to convince the financial controllers to get involved and accountants to treat our projects differently is that a lot of what we do in energy management is capital expenditures, and they're treated differently than operating costs. Okay. Operating costs can be written off against operating revenue, but capital expenditures are usually treated differently, and they're treated as debt, okay, rather than being seen as an investment into improved lowering of operating costs or improved enhancement of operating revenue. So you often have capital expenditures over here and operating costs and operating returns over here, and neither the twain shall meet. So these capital expenditures are simply seen as debt for energy management, but they're not awarded the credits they get from lowering operating costs or enhancing operating revenue. So drawing that link is a very important consideration. So energy managers often have to sit down with accounting departments and say, how can we track this? How can we track how the operating savings from our energy initiatives are actually paying for the capital cost? Okay, how do we draw those links so that senior managers understand those links more clearly? Because that's one of the major barriers in the minds of people who are not used to seeing a lot of their capital expenditures in this way. And that will depend upon how accounting is done within the organization and how flexible they are. Okay, but that's an important issue because a lot of the time an organization doesn't want to take on more debt because they're not understanding clearly the linkage to lowering operating costs and enhancing operating benefits, okay, or revenue, returns, profit, if you will. Okay. Another major barrier is the lack of understanding of energy performance contracts. You know, sometimes the best solution for many large organizations is, in fact, to work with an energy performance contract and with these specialty companies. But typically they will work with these companies by having an energy manager within their own organization that works with them directly, working with the energy performance contract company, okay? And so you need to be able to understand those companies, understand how they work, understand their business cases, understand, making sure your accounting and finance people understand the way these companies work. Now, the beauty of these types of companies is these contracts often appear as an operating cost, okay, against which operating revenue can be offset. Our operating revenue can offset these costs, that is, which is a clearer link than when the company does it by themselves. Plus, there are various financing options through these companies to take into account. But we're not offering, this course can't go heavily into energy performance contracts, but it's important to understand that subsequent to your program and when you start your career, developing expertise in energy management contracts and in finance and business management will become very important if you want to move up in the organization and make a dynamic career out of your field, okay? And a lot of it the next thing you're discovering is in looking at your own business cases. The lack of understanding of technology and process options in smaller organizations is a major barrier to adopting improved energy management and to financing these things, okay? And a lot of that is simply ignorance in the way the process works, ignorance on the types of technologies that are out there that are already available that can assist the company in moving forward and improving their energy management situation. Now those slides you can look at them yourself, but there's quite a considerable list of very obvious things that can be done that are not new and innovative. We have data on how much energy they save and so on, right? What you need to do now is make sure you're communicating that information to your client in an effective manner in the context of your business case, all right? So, now, finance options. This is another big discussion you'll have if you're working with clients. I mean, how am I going to finance this? There are a wide range of programs in different jurisdictions related to climate change and so on. Be sensitive to those and make sure you understand those when governments offer incentives to reduce GHGs. But some of the more typical ones we see, of course, is utility on-bill financing is one way that a small to medium-sized business in particular can finance its transition to a more energy efficient state. On-bill financing is usually provided by a utility and often the upgrade of a heating or cooling system. And then what can happen is that the actual power company helps the smaller business finance those. And then the power company gets that money back through its enhanced billing. In other words, an increase in the billing for the power to repay the initial investment. Now, this can be a very effective thing for small to medium-sized businesses to do, to deal with their upgrades, okay, their energy management upgrades, okay. Now, you can get into the detail of that. I have a little more information on it in the slides. Third-party financing, of course, is a common one. This is when we go to third-party financiers to be able to demonstrate that if we borrow this much money, or if you lend us this much money, we're planning to do this, 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 and this with our operations to enhance our energy savings, and then we can afford to pay back the loan. Again, the bank's going to want solid verification that this will work, okay? The power companies prefer when companies do that, because the banks and the financial institutions are set up to handle defaults, to handle any problems with repayment. That the power companies, that's not their main line of business. So sometimes governments will move away from utility billing to third-party financing and provide incentives to third-party financiers to lend money for energy management, like what's happening in Saskatchewan and a few other jurisdictions. Okay? Now, but when you go to third-party financiers, that places even a greater demand on the quality of your business case, because the banks are going to want to see, a clear plan forward, how the organization can afford to pay back, what guarantees is the borrower going to put against their loan assets or whatever. It gets more complicated. Those types of business cases will typically be done as a team with a finance and accounting expert, an energy manager, and any other parties that may be applicable to that organization. Okay? Now, so because the banks will use risk screening the way they'll use risk screening for any organization, for any kind of a lending program. But the banks are getting more sensitive to climate change. They're getting more sensitive to the need for energy efficiency. They're getting more sensitive to the fact that companies that already have borrowed money from them must become more energy efficient, or they might get into trouble later on and not be able to pay not only their energy management loan, but other loans that they have to the financial institutions. So banks are getting more sophisticated in dealing with these issues, but the quality of the business case needs to be quite strong, okay? Local improvement charges represent another innovative financing mechanism. Homeowners, for instance, would finance their retrofits through the municipality and repay the loan to their property tax bill. That can also be applied to small business like retailers, restaurants, things like that, okay? That's been tried in a number of different jurisdictions around OECD countries. It's still in use. But not all jurisdictions have tried this approach yet. But, this is an approach to look for if you're dealing in a jurisdiction and you're dealing with a small and medium-sized enterprise. Look for whether there are local improvement charges. Look for some of these other options that I've been telling you about as well. Then, of course, the ESCOs, the energy service companies, they will finance the initiatives. Of course, they'll charge it back to the client, but they will finance major energy efficiency improvements. So larger residential, commercial, and institutional buildings will typically benefit from ESCOs. So if you go to the Government of Canada, you'll find out that they don't have very many energy managers around because they primarily deal with Canada's federal buildings through an ESCO. Okay? The efficiency savings in doing that come from the fact that the ESCO can do huge economy scales of power purchases, of equipment purchases, and so on, saving the client considerable amounts of money. Plus, the ESCO shares the risk with the client, right? I mean, mind you, the ESCO, when things are going well, is making a significant profit, but at the end of the day, for a large institution that doesn't want to staff up with a whole bunch of energy managers, doesn't want to take a lot of risks on their own, would like to share that risk with an ESCO, okay? And then that risk, then the ESCO benefits from sharing that risk because risk is money. But on the other hand, they also have all the expertise internal to the organization on how to improve efficiency overall for the client. So that can often be a very good cooperative arrangement between a larger client and an ESCO. Okay? So these are the things to think about barriers to financing, but also financing options. The list of financing options could go on for slide after slide after slide if we explore all the greenhouse gas greenhouse gas mitigation financing arrangements in all the jurisdictions of North America. But that's a whole class of issues that you need to be sure to look at. The financing options I've given you now are the more well-known ones. But there's going to have to be an outpouring of innovative financing options going forward if we're going to deal with GHG emissions and the climate change problem. So sensitizing yourself to those options, making sure you're constantly scanning what's going on in those financing options is an important role to be played by energy managers. Okay. Now, typically, the larger the financing you're looking for, the more sophisticated the financer you're dealing with, puts additional stresses on some of the other barriers that I was talking about in terms of the quality of a business case, good communications, good verification, all those kinds of issues. Okay, so let's keep that stuff in mind, and as you get further on in your career, you're going to want to develop greater expertise, not only in business planning, but also in the financing options. But for now, as long as you're exposed to these issues, you're getting a first run at a mock business case. This is step one, a very small step towards developing that sophistication if you want to move up in energy management, if you want to get hired by an ESCO and instead of being a worker at one point want to be a manager, managing a number of client files or one huge client file or whatever. These are the skills that you're going to have to develop, okay, going forward. Now, in this afternoon's Zoom call, don't forget to come with your questions about your business case. Do not leave a question unasked if that's going to delay you for days to be able to get something done. Come prepared in the Zoom call to ask your questions. All right? So I'll see you on this afternoon's Zoom call. Keep it going. Let's keep chunking away. Let's get the course done. Let's graduate and hopefully get launched into whatever career you're going to be finding yourself moving through. Okay? Take care for now. Bye-bye now.